to the pre-application conference call for the fiscal year 2017 Rural Sexual Assault, Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, and Stalking Program. The Office on Violence Against Women, also referred to as OVW, is convening pre-application calls to go over the details of the solicitation for the rural program for the 2017 funding cycle and to respond to questions regarding the application process. OVW Rural Unit staff will be facilitating these calls. My name is Charlotte Turpin, and also with me is Debbie Bright. We are both rural program specialists, and we also have Michelle Thomas, who is our program assistant, and many of you probably have had communications from Michelle. As you may have noticed, in the solicitation, we have offered two pre-application conference calls, today's call and another call scheduled for Wednesday, February 8th. Both of these calls are structured similarly. The only difference in the calls has been the questions posed by the participant. We will begin with a walkthrough of the solicitation and will highlight requirements. At the end of the solicitation overview, we will open up the call to allow participants to ask questions. This call is meant to serve as a source of information regarding the rural application. We will cover highlights of the solicitation in today's call. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the solicitation. All applicants are responsible for reviewing the contents of all application materials. OVW staff cannot provide any feedback to applicants either during this call or in response to subsequent inquiries about the quality or specific concept of a proposal, or provide any information outside of that presented in the solicitation that would give any advantage or even the appearance of an advantage to an applicant. We will be available throughout the open solicitation period to address any questions about the application requirements. Please feel free to contact the Rural Unit at any time during the application process with questions. Now, if you have your solicitation in front of you, and I hope you do, today's call will generally follow the order of topics as listed within the solicitation. And we're going to begin with eligibility. Eligibility is mentioned on the cover of the solicitation as well as beginning on page 9. Eligible applicants are limited to states, Indian tribes, territories, local governments, and nonprofit or public or private entities, including tribal nonprofit organizations. Both new and continuation applications are being accepted. Grantees that received rural funding in FY 2015 or FY 2016 are not eligible to apply. Eligible service area documentation. As we have stated previously, the rural statute within the Violence Against Women Act requires that rural funds are directed to victims residing within areas that are rural eligible. To demonstrate that the areas that your agency is proposing targeting services to are rural eligible, you must follow the instructions found in Appendix F of the application solicitation and upload the information as instructed. The rural program does not require maps of your service area. Only the documentation targeted service area is, in fact, rural. This is a requirement, and non-submission of the rural eligibility service area documentation will preclude your application from being considered. So it's very important that you follow the directions in Appendix F, download the pages that certify that your area is rural or census tracts that are rural, and submit those documentation pages only. There's one exception to this rule. Federal recognized Indian tribes are automatically eligible for rural program funding and do not need to submit documentation for the proposed service area. So the only people that don't have to submit this documentation is federally recognized Indian tribes. Everyone else, you must do that. We're moving on to required partnerships. All eligible applications must include a sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking victim service provider as the lead applicant and or as a formal project partner as demonstrated through the requirement of an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. A complete overview of the criteria used to determine a victim service provider can be found in this section. Additionally, eligible applicants, including those submitted by a victim service provider, must include at least one project partner and should include agencies and organizations necessary to implement the project. Moving on to delivery of legal assistance. In previous years, legal assistance was limited to legal assistance in seeking protection orders and limited immigration matters. With the implementation of VAWA 13, legal services have been expanded to include comprehensive legal services such as divorce, custody, and child support. All applicants proposing to provide legal assistance with funds under the 2017 Rural Program must certify in writing regarding their expertise and training. A sample letter can be found in the link in this section. Any person providing legal assistance with funds through this program has demonstrated expertise in providing legal assistance to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking in the targeted population, or is partnered with an entity or person that has demonstrated expertise as described in subparagraph A, and has completed or will complete training in connection with domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking and related legal issues, including training on evidence-based factors, risk factors, or domestic and dating violence homicide. The requirement continues, and I'm summarizing, that applicants proposing to provide legal assistance for funds under the 2017 Rural Program must certify that the training program must have been developed with input from and in collaboration with domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking service providers and others. They will inform and continue to inform domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking programs and coalitions about their work. And finally, the grantee's organizational policies do not require mediation or counseling involving offenders and victims physically together in cases where domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or child sexual abuse is an issue. The certification should be made in the form of a letter on letterhead and signed by the authorized official. If the certification is not included, the application will not go forward to peer review. So you must submit your legal certification letter if you are planning on doing legal services in your proposed project. And there is a sample certification letter included within the solicitation in Appendix B.
Appendix B or Appendix F?
Okay. Well, if it's not in Appendix B, we'll check.
Okay.
So moving on to deadlines. Also on the cover of the solicitation, you'll note that applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on February 23rd, 2017. Please do not wait until the last minute to submit your application. Also, it's important to note that GMS will be down for maintenance on February 18th, beginning at 12:01 a.m., and will not be available until Tuesday, February 21st at 6 a.m. So it's important to get your applications in before the maintenance so that you don't get interrupted by this downtime for the system. Moving on to registration. You'll also note on the cover of the solicitation that applicants are strongly encouraged to register on or before February 2nd, 2017. And this is a Thursday.
2 days away, guys.
Yes.
2 days.
Registration includes several steps: obtaining a DUNS number, ensuring that you register within the SAM system, and registering on grants.gov. We'll go over each of these steps individually. Every applicant must obtain a Data Universal Number System, that's the DUNS number, and register online with System and Awards Management, that's the SAM, well before the grant deadline. So if you haven't done that yet,
You really need to.
yeah, you have to do it as soon as possible because you're going to get jammed up. There's a reason that we set a deadline date for February 2nd, as the process to register for DUNS and SAM is extremely lengthy. If you do not have a DUNS number and are not current in the SAM system, you should begin the process as soon as possible. Register with grants.gov no later than February 2nd as well. The same goes for grants.gov, all of them. February 2nd is the date to remember. And again, that's 2 days away. The registration process is not one that can be completed quickly. It takes time, days even. And you should begin the process as soon as possible. Every year we have a handful of applicants that didn't make the deadline because they were delinquent with their SAM and or grants.gov registration. And that's really sad, you know.
Yeah, you go through all this work and putting together your application and, you know, all the forms and stuff that you go through, and then to not get it because you haven't done DUNS and SAM early enough is just heartbreaking.
It is. It really is. So just be sure that you are paying attention to those dates. And if you're considering applying, a letter of registration should be submitted to OVW by February 2nd as well. The letters of registration are not mandatory. However, it's helpful for us to have internally to attempting to identify the potential volume of applications that are expected and to plan accordingly for a peer review process. So that's the beginning, and I'm gonna now turn it over to Debbie so she can go over the program description for you. Debbie?
Thank you, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. This is Debbie Bright, and I'm a grant program specialist in the rural unit. And many of you, if you've heard me before, I always start by saying that I'm, feel very lucky and very blessed to be working in the rural unit. I love the rural program. I was born and raised in West Virginia. My father grew up in Appalachia, and I have a lot of personal experience with rural areas. And there's several things I really love about the rural program. One is the flexibility of the rural program, and you're going to hear about that in just a minute when we talk about the program scope. It's very wide and broad on what you can apply for, and really it speaks to local jurisdictions being able to identify the needs in their communities and working to define the concept. So the program, begins, part one of the solicitation begins obviously with the background on the history and goals for the rural program. The statute is very specific, and it is exactly what it says, specifically for the rural program. It identifies the unique challenges and barriers that those of us in rural programs have in trying to provide assistance to victims of domestic violence or sexual assault, geographic isolation, transportation barriers, the economic structure, and are some of those, and just the lack of availability of services, or how the distance is just phenomenal in some areas. So it really speaks to that, and you'll see that reflected in our solicitation. Those factors also complicate the ability of the criminal justice system to investigate and prosecute these crimes. So we really look at the coordinated, comprehensive response in rural communities as well. We have 3 purpose areas within the FY17 rural program. And you're going to find this information beginning on page 2. And I'm not going to read the purpose areas to you verbatim. However, there are 3 that I do want to highlight, and I'll just very briefly touch on each of them. The first is really talks about identifying and appropriately responding to child, youth, and adult victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking in rural communities by encouraging the collaboration. So that really speaks to those, coordinated community responses, sexual assault response teams, and working together in a multidisciplinary fashion to solve the problems within your community and respond to those crimes. The second is establishing and expanding services in rural communities, and specifically nonprofit, non-governmental services that have the history and expertise of providing services to child, youth, and adults. And thirdly is to increase the safety and well-being of women and children in rural communities by, and you'll see this again, this is broken down into 2 prongs on number 3 purpose area, dealing directly and immediately with sexual assault. We've seen that before, slightly, similarly addressed in purpose area number 1. And then 3B, I want to really go over, which is creating and implementing strategies to increase awareness and prevent sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Now, here's an area that the rural program really demonstrates its flexibility. 3B, you'll see, talks about education and prevention programs, really. And there's very few programs that have that ability to address education and prevention and OVW, quite frankly. But what we're doing in the rural program is really focusing on 3A. And we will allow for folks to integrate 3B, those prevention and education programs, and we welcome that. But we want to make sure that services are provided with that education and prevention. So you'll note in the solicitation that proposed projects must devote at least 70% of their project activities and budget to rural purpose areas 1, 2, or 3A. So you can address 3B, prevention and education, but we really want to limit it to 30% of your project budget and activities. And the reason for that is we certainly commend you for the education and prevention programs. It's very important. But at the same time, if while you're doing those programs, individuals present, we want to make sure that those services are provided for them. In addition to those 3 purpose areas, the Rural Program Statute, and this is where it originated, identifies that grantees must implement 1 or more of 5 different strategies. And again, it's very similar to the purpose area, but very briefly, and I won't read them verbatim, but the 5 purpose areas, number 1 is implementing, expanding, and establishing cooperative efforts and projects. Again, you will see that that theme, that's the spirit. Well, actually, it's the spirit of many programs in OVW. I would argue it's the spirit of the entire statute of VAWA, but you're going to see that cooperative theme throughout. Number 2 is providing the treatment, counseling, advocacy, legal assistance. And remember, Charlotte spoke about legal assistance now being much broader. In addition to providing protective order and immediate legal needs for victims, we can also expand that, and applicants can apply to do family law as well, and other long-term or short-term victim and population-specific services. Number 3, again, working in cooperation with the community. Again, you hear that theme of cooperation to develop education and prevention strategies directed towards such issues. 4th is developing, enlarging, or strengthening programs addressing sexual assault. And the 5th one and final is developing programs and strategies that focus on the specific needs of victims who reside in those remote, rural, and geographically isolated areas. Okay, so we're moving on to some mandatory program requirements that I just want to highlight. The rural program, again, this originates from the statute. It's very specific. The funding was obviously dedicated for rural, and they wanted to make sure that it really was getting to the most rural areas and communities within the United States and the U.S. territories. Therefore, they defined, and VAWA 2013, the reauthorization of VAWA, tweaks the definition of a rural state a little bit, and it increased the population. I'm sorry, does somebody have a comment? No? Okay, I might be getting some feedback. The rural state means is defined as a population density of 57 or fewer persons per square mile, or a state in which the largest county has fewer than 250,000 people. So we took that definition, we combined it with the census data from most recent capturing of census, which was 2010, and identified the rural states in our nation. And you will find those, the definition, there's 21, and it's in a footnote on page 3, but just very briefly I will list off the rural states. And it's important to know whether you're in a rural state or not, because the statute identifies 75% of all funding would be directed to applicants within rural states. So if you're in a rural state, you have more of that pot of money to compete for. If you're in a non-rural state, you certainly may still apply, but you're competing for about 25% of those funds. Those that are rural states are Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Utah, Vermont, West Virginia, Wyoming, and our friends in all 5 U.S. territories, American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And as I said before, if you, whether or not you're in a rural state or a non-rural state, as an applicant, you must follow the directions, and it's actually Appendix G. I think before Charlotte said Appendix S, it's Appendix G, and I apologize for that. It gives you the step-by-step directions on how to determine and document whether or not you're in a rural eligible area to apply. And so regardless of whether you're a rural state or not, you need to follow those instructions, print out the results, and attach it to your application. It's a mandatory section of the application. So even if you're in a rural state, again, or non-rural state, you still must be in a rural area or community. And that's why we do that step-by-step we hope it's user-friendly. We tested it a few times within our unit and just made sure that we were able to follow the instructions pretty clearly in Appendix G to whether you're in a rural area or not, and just document that process. This year for FY17, we have we have two different priority areas, We have the first being increasing support for sexual assault, including services, law enforcement response, and prosecution. Now, in terms of meeting a priority area, and you certainly don't have to as an applicant, it's a choice. You may be, have a different priority area that you're applying for, or your own priority within your community. It might not match what we have in the solicitation, but we're seeking and prioritizing applications that meaningfully address sexual assault. And we gave several examples, such as supporting staff positions of adult or pediatric sexual assault nurse examiners or sexual assault forensic examiners, training for those professionals, programs that serve child sexual assault or abuse victims, and with a preference for services that include that multidisciplinary team response, such as what could be found as in a child advocacy center setting, is an example. But we also encourage applicants to consider other areas that may be in need for addressing and serving sexual assault victims, such as counseling, establishment or enhancement of SART teams, specialized personnel or units for law enforcement or prosecution, specialized training related to responding, investigating, or prosecuting sexual assault cases, and addressing rape kit backlogs. Very popular in the media right now. We're hearing a lot about the rape kit backlog, and if you're a community that is addressing that, you may want to consider this as a priority area for your application. And also think about programs that involve implementation of the Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, and work which is really emphasizing, prioritizing working with incarcerated victims. Now, when we say we're prioritizing an application that meaningfully addresses one of these areas in sexual assault, we have defined meaningfully, and that means 75% or more of your application is directed to meaningfully addressing sexual assault in one of these areas. If, in fact, your application is found to be addressing sexual assault, and if you are, once peer review is over, you would be assessed an additional 5 points for your application for meeting that priority area for sexual assault. Our second area of priority is addressing underserved populations, and it specifically says meaningfully increase access to OVW programming for specific underserved populations, based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, age, etc. So we recognize that there's a lot of diversity in our rural communities, and one area that we looked at was African Americans. Literature suggests that in terms of rural communities in the United States, about the average is about 8% of the population is African American in rural communities. Our statistics and data that we see from the programs that are currently funded under our program certainly aren't meeting that 8%. And we felt it was, something that we really wanted to, we fluctuate between 2 and 3% actually. And so we really wanted to just mention that and encourage applicants to consider that as a priority. The other area that we found we're really, wanted to challenge ourselves with elderly population because, statistics and what we're doing is just not matching. So, there is a need to get out there and concentrate on the elderly population. And again, when we say this is a priority area for underserved, again, it's meaningfully addressed. We're defining it as 75% of both your application and your budget. Now, on underserved population, we are not assessing an additional 5 points, but in both the underserved and sexual assault priority areas, you'll also see the language that we reserve the right to consider your application during the recommendation process if it is within a priority area, meaning, it may come into consideration in terms of scores and so forth. Maybe you scored a little bit lower than another application, but your application contained, really was addressing a priority area, and we would consider that. I'm moving on to activities that compromise victim safety and recovery. You're going to see this at the beginning of page 6 on the solicitation. And as always, we are reviewing, your applications for scope, reasonableness, and safety issues. And so we do look at that. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I do want you to make sure that you review the activities that compromise victim safety and recovery, the out-of-scope activities, as well as the unallowable activities. And if you have any questions about any of those, please feel free to give us a call. And I'm going to turn it back to Charlotte now, who will begin with the federal award information.
Okay, I'm back, and we're going to talk about the award period. And this grant award period is for 36 months, and it begins on October 1st, 2017. The funding levels for 2017 are for continuation applications limited to $750,000, and for new applications will be limited to $500,000. OVW has the discretion to award grants for greater or lesser amounts than requested and to negotiate the scope of work and budget with the applicants prior to award of the grant. So remember, continuation $750,000, new applicants $500,000. For application and submission information, we'll start with formatting and technical requirements. And you'll see that the project narrative is no more than 20 pages, and any pages exceeding page 20 will not be reviewed. So be mindful of your page count, your number count, because if you have important information that falls on page 21, it won't get reviewed and won't be considered. The data summary sheet, page 13 of the solicitation, is not included within the 20-page limit, so that's separate. The data summary may be single or double-spaced and may be 1 to 4 pages in length. Please make sure all the required elements listed in this section are included. This is mandatory information, and applicants that do not include all the mandatory components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. So that's important to pay attention to the requirements on the data summary sheet. And so for application requirements, applicants must follow required documentation and demonstrate that the program eligibility requirements have been met. Project narrative, the budget detail worksheet, and narrative, the memorandum of understanding, the eligibility service area documentation, and the legal certification letter. If an application packet does not include these 5 mandatory elements, the application will not be forwarded to peer review. So just to recap, the necessary items for your project to be reviewed by peer reviewers are the project narrative, the budget detail worksheet and narrative, the memorandum of understanding, the eligible service area documentation, and the legal certification letter. So now moving on to the project proposal abstract. The abstract are to be no more than 2 pages long, and the abstract may also be single or double spaced. And budgets. Budgets generally, food and beverage costs are not allowable, and under no circumstance may OVW funding be used to supply food and or beverages during refreshment breaks. There are in the budget conference guidelines, food and beverage guidelines, all the information that you need to know about what you can put in your budget for conferences. And even though that information is mainly for TA providers that put on conferences, sometimes grantees have meetings or gatherings that these same food and beverage guidelines apply to you as well.
Because everyone puts in their application the travel. So if you decide that you want to hire a TA provider to come in and train, train your partners, train you guys, you fly them in, you spend the money on travel, and then you're like, oh, I want to throw lunch for everybody. No, you can't throw lunch. Everyone's responsible for getting their own lunch. You can't spend our money on that.
Correct. So now we'll move on to training and technical assistance. There is a allocation of $10,000 in your budget for OVW training and technical assistance for the rural states, or I'm sorry, the United States, and Alaska, Hawaii, and the U.S. territories, that allocation is $15,000, and that's mainly because of distance. These are the minimum amounts allocated for OVW training and technical assistance, and do not preclude the applicant from including more funds if they feel warranted. So if you think you need more than $10,000 or $15,000 to complete the training, technical assistance, you're more than welcome to put more in, but you have to have at least $10,000, and Alaska, Hawaii, and U.S. territories $15,000 in that budget line item for OVW technical assistance. And I believe that's also found in the travel section in the budget, and in the when you're doing TA for your partners, that would be placed in the contracts and consultant area of the budget. So the Memorandum of Understanding begins on page 17 of the solicitation. The requirements are similar to previous years, but nevertheless, we strongly encourage you to carefully read the requirements for MOUs found in this section. We ask that MOU is very specific and mirrors the narrative and the budget. So the project narrative, the MOU, and the budget must reflect one another. Information specific to required partners can be found in the program eligibility requirements in Section C. So now we're going to move on to forms. Confidentiality notice form. All applicants are required to acknowledge that they have received notice that grantees and subgrantees must comply with confidentiality and privacy requirements of the Violence Against Women Act as amended. You'll find other required forms and attachments to be similar to previous years. Those include the SF424, the standard assurances, the letter of non-supplanting, the financial accounting practices, financial capability questionnaire, and indirect cost rate agreements if they apply. So those are the forms that are required if applicable and must be submitted with your application. So Debbie, you want to take over with the submission of the applications?
Sure. Okay, I'm sorry. Everyone should note that we've said it before, and just to reiterate, that all applications are submitted through grants.gov. And I also put it in the chat box just to reiterate, they're doing maintenance from the 18th through the early morning of the 21st. So please be cognizant of that, because it's 2 days before your application is due. And so it's going to be completely down for 3 days or 2.5 days. So please make sure you schedule accordingly. Also, grants.gov has a customer support or help desk that is at 1-800-518-4726. That number is also within the solicitation. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, believe it or not, with the exception of federal holidays. Now, I mention that because President's Day is so close to our deadline that grants.gov will be closed on Monday, February 20th. So, you wouldn't be able to get through to have them answer your questions on that Monday before the applications are due. If an applicant submits multiple versions of an application, it inevitably happens every year. We have several applicants that submit duplicate applications. OVW is only going to review the most recent version submitted, and that's on page 24 of the solicitation. And I want to reiterate, because it does happen. I don't want to say 10% of our applicants do this, but it's probably close. I think we had 8 duplicate applications last year, but we've had much higher on other years. And, someone might submit an app and say, oh, goodness, I failed to attach the MOU. So they resubmit the app, attach the MOU, and that's fine to do, to do a duplicate app. As long as you're before that deadline, you can do that if you forgot to attach something. But let's say on this second time, they attached the MOU but forgot to attach the budget, and this actually has happened just last year. We're only going to review the application that was submitted most recently. We're not going to go and say, well, gee, I see you submitted your budget here. I'll take it and put it with this application. We can't do that. So be very cognizant that you're submitting a full and complete application package. I want to talk just briefly about experiencing unforeseeable technical issues. And please read through those procedures now, because, you never know when something's going to happen. I mean, it covers pretty much everything. I would hope that nothing happens to any of us, but it covers technical difficulties to natural disasters. And please read through it, familiarize yourself. You may think it may never happen to you, but if it does, this is the very important part. You must follow the procedures, letter of the law, exactly as it is written, to even be considered for a late submission. There's no exception to that. And inevitably, every year, we have a handful of folks, at least a handful, that submit late applications. Everything from, very heartbreaking, but 1 or 2 minutes after the deadline, because it's 12:01, period, shuts down. You can't get in. And there's no turning back, and they may say, well, this happened and that happened. You need to document every contact that you make with grants.gov and make sure that you are submitting everything as it's defined within the solicitation if some extraordinary event occurs. If it's something, and quite frankly, the most prominent reason for late application is the applicant did not register with grants.gov in time. You really have to make sure you have your DUNS number, your SANS number, we talked about that earlier, and register with grants.gov. It's not an instant process. You cannot wait until 1 or 2 days before the deadline and accomplish it. You just can't. I had an applicant last year who was trying to get through that process, and when you're doing the process for DUNS, SAMs, and when you get to grants.gov especially, you will you have to have that authorized rep sign off or do an electronic signature on different things to get approvals, and her authorized rep was out of the country and she couldn't submit it. You have to think now, and that's why we say that we want you to go through all of those technical challenges. They can be challenges for some of us. The DUNS, SAM, and grants.gov to make sure you are good to go way before the application process. Inevitably, those that are late, the vast majority are not accepted due to, we say the fault of the applicant. So on pages 24 and 25, you can find the information about everything I just discussed, the unforeseeable technical issues and duplicate applications, as well as this policy on late submissions. Okay. Let's see. We do encourage you to always include language, make sure that your language and physically accessible to all of the clients that you may be serving. So we want to encourage you to allocate grant funds to support activities to help ensure any individuals who are possibly disabled or deaf or persons with limited English proficiency have full access to your program. So make sure that you think about that as you're applying, because this is certainly one of those areas that we are taking into consideration. So you want to think about websites, materials that you're proposing to develop under the proposed project, and make sure that you're allowing the funds that you need to make sure that you are accommodating them and accessible, making those materials accessible. Just to mention on unallowable activities, we do not allow applicants in the rural program to use funds to conduct research. However, we do allow for 3% of your budget to be allocated for the purpose of assessing the effectiveness of funded activities. And make sure you look at those unallowable activities and make sure that you're not falling under any of those, because you would be considered out of scope. Application review information. All applications are subject to peer review and programmatic review, and that is fair and based on the criteria outlined in this solicitation. And I'll be really clear that, some of my advice to applicants is you need to follow the solicitation verbatim, quite frankly. When you get to the sections of what needs to be included in what will be done, who the partners are and so forth, please look at all of those bullets that are under each section and make sure you're hitting all those points. So often we see that, folks just don't address what we're asking them and it's required to do. And I also encourage you, I think I see probably the most mistakes in the MOU. So you really want to make sure that your MOU encompasses all of those variables that we're asking for. And our peer reviewers are looking at, reviewing your applications just based on the solicitation requirements. It's just that clear. An example, though, of last year, something that happened last year that was heartbreaking, is an applicant was, asking for feedback from the peer review process because they were not funded. And when I looked at the peer review comments and dove into it, what happened was the applicant had written an application that was 21 pages. Our solicitation is clear that the requirement maximum is 20 pages. The 21st page was not reviewed, and it was a whole section. And so really, that applicant was not funded because she didn't follow directions. And it's very simple. If you just really keep that solicitation in front of you as you're developing your application and just make sure you're hitting all of those variables within it. Again, I just want to remind you that applications are due, and I want to make a correction. I said 12:01 before. Please forgive me. Applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on February 23rd of this year. And, I've said it before, but please do it now, like this week, if you can. Theoretically, you should be doing it by Thursday. Obtaining a DUNS number, registering for SAM, beginning or hopefully achieving the process of registering for grants.gov, and sending in your letter of registration. And the letter of registration is not required, but we really appreciate it because the number of letters of registration we get really drives our peer review, the number of peer reviewers that we need or are projecting. So we do really appreciate that. We'll put up our contact information now, and it's in the PowerPoint. Excuse me, when you download it. But you could reach us by phone or by email. Generally, Charlotte and I divide up the calls or questions by state. We are assigned to different states. But if you just ask for the rural unit, your call will be directed accordingly. And you can also ask questions. Please send in your letters of registration, all on that ovw.rural email address. And so with that said, our presentation portion is over for today, and we're going to open up for question and answers now. Alicia, can you help us do that?
I can read them off based on...
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. So you answered Lisa's question. Does the requirement about the certification letter include provision of assistance with orders of protection?
Yes,
and you
it
said,
does.
Yeah, the legal cert is required for orders of protection as well. David Dalton had a question. So if the only legal type of service is anticipated is prosecution of defendants committing these crimes, is that a legal service? Do they need the cert?
That's an excellent question. Yes, I would say you do. I don't want you to, really we're thinking about civil, but I would say it is very wise to include the certification if you are prosecuting those crimes. Thank you for that question. That's an excellent one.
Okay.
I see one question, if you don't mind, Michelle, I'll jump in. David is asking, is it $10,000 in training per year or over 36 months? Again, I apologize because we must not be doing a good job articulating that in the solicitation because we get that question quite frequently. The 10,000 requirement is over the 3 years. And it's 15,000 if you're in Alaska, Hawaii, or the territories. But that, yeah, the 10,000 or 15,000 as it may be is for a 3-year period.
And Charlotte's correct in that that's the minimum, right?
That's correct. It's minimum. You can always apply for more. It would not affect your proposal or the review at all if you want to apply for more.
All right. Next question is from Ariel Herman, which I answered, but I just want to make sure I'm correct on this.
Sure.
That if we're serving most of our state minus the couple of urban areas, do we print out the documentation for all 16-plus counties? And I said, yes, you do.
That's correct. Yes, you do. And I apologize because the process can be very onerous at times. If you are a coalition or a statewide organization that is applying for multiple counties or multiple areas, multiple census tracts, multiple parishes if you're in Louisiana, or boroughs if you're in Alaska, yes, you do need to print out each and every one of those proving that your targeted service area is in fact rural eligible. Thank you. That's a great question as well.
Okay, next we have Paula's question, and this is a two-part because I asked for some clarification. She said page 3, BI seems to contradict rural definition. It says any area or community that's within an area designated as a metropolitan statistical area or considered as part of a metropolitan statistical area. And then her second part was, where was it? A says no part of which is within an area designated as a standard metro, but then B says an area or community. Paula, I'm sorry, Paula, can you clarify what page are you looking at of the solicitation? What section are you looking at? And we'll come back to it.
Okay. Thank you. And, you know, while Paula is getting that information, Michelle, I'll just jump in and maybe just say this. You know, the language on what is a rural eligible area is overwhelming, quite frankly, on the definitions. That's why we've provided that tool in Appendix G, where you can just, you don't need to know, you don't need to determine yourself if you meet that metropolitan or rural area. Just go to Appendix G, the first link available, you link on that, you put in your state, it will identify all your counties or boroughs or parishes. You pull up which county you're targeting, and it'll tell you if you're rural eligible, fully or partially or not eligible. And then if you're partially eligible, you need to continue on in Appendix G and complete the second portion of the assignment, which is documenting the portions of that area that are, in fact, rural eligible, and that's by census tracts. And I apologize that you have to do this, but it's, you know, it derives from the statute. We're trying to document that the funds are in fact directed to those areas that Congress meant for them to be. Thank you.
I consider it kind of like citing your sources. It's like you say,
That's right.
Okay, prove you're rural. Where's your source coming from? Because
right, that's correct.
peer review, we're not going to go look it up, and we're not going to assume you're correct.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Next question, Belinda Knight. I answered this one, but again, let me make sure I had it correctly. Belinda says, regarding our rural documentation, is a printout, oh, shoot, I just lost it. Is a printout of the confirmation screen adequate? And I said, yeah, because we're just printing off the screenshots of the pages, right, Debbie?
Yes, that's correct. And don't try to recreate those pages. We've had folks before that try to do their own form of rural documentation. Please don't do that. You have to follow the directions within Appendix G.
Okay. Kathy Ray, if our project involves both priority areas, can the two combined meet the required 75%? And I'm not sure.
Great question. Okay, so you mean like you're going to, it really would, that's a great question. I'm assuming, let me just feedback what I'm assuming this means, that you're going to partially address sexual assault and partially address underserved. And maybe your application is 50% sexual assault and 30% underserved, and the other, percentage is something else. The answer actually would have to be no, because for each priority area, it's real clear what that definition is, and it's meaningfully addressed 75% for that particular priority area. And that's a great question, though. We never really thought about that, but we thought a lot about those priority areas. But I think we're really trying to stick to very clean applications that show that they are specifically targeting a certain population.
Okay. Next up is David Dalton. In Kentucky, disabled adults, victims of sexual assault, are a separate crime. Would those cases qualify? Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking elder abuse. And let me break this down because I saw this earlier on the chat and I jumped in. Elder abuse, depending on your statute, we need to break it down for what the rural is able and willing to fund in terms of activities based on our statute. And that is for sexual assault, regardless of the age, that can be addressed. So rural addresses child sexual assault. It also would address elderly sexual assault, regardless of who the offender is for elderly. What it would not address is physical abuse on the elderly individual if it was a caretaker versus an intimate partner. So if the elderly individual is being physically abused by a current or former intimate partner, that would be okay under rural. But, a caregiver in a facility that is, either neglecting or physically abusing them, that would not be eligible. David, I'm not sure if that answered Linda's question, which was next, but I'm not sure. David, you might need to give us an example. So let's see, what was the closed? Gavin, can we download the closed captioning? Yes, you can download the closed captioning. Judy, okay. Debbie, you answered this already, but I'm just going to read it out again. Judy Chen, executive compensation, FF-ATA, do we need to provide this for all partners or just for the lead applicant? Debbie, you said you provide this for the lead applicant only. If you're awarded a grant, you'll be given instructions as to whether or not FF-ATA reporting is required for your partners. So for the application, it's lead applicants only for FF-ATA.
Right.
Lisa Maddox, are we required to allocate grant funds to partners? Or is it okay to only include partners who contribute time and in-kind resources? So Lisa's asking, is there going to be a money requirement for the partners?
And I did answer that. I'll answer it verbally. There is not a requirement for compensating your partners. However, let me say this, our solicitation is very clear. If your partners are providing a service, they do need to be compensated appropriately. And so take that into consideration. If your partners are contributing their time in kind and not charging you, they're doing what they're committing to as part of their job, that's fine. Just make sure it's clear in your narrative as well as in the MOU. Good question. Thank you.
And some compensation for that could be OVW technical assistance. You're providing for your partner to take advantage of the TA, so that could be considered as compensation as well.
Okay. Then we've got a couple of questions. Oh, wait. Where did that one go? Yeah, we've got a couple of questions about the whole food and travel and per diem. Two from Sherry, one from Rachel. Yeah, the food for travel.
Oh, okay.
So in terms of like, because Debbie, travelers get per diem, but you can't specifically get food and beverages for something you're hosting?
That's correct. Yes. So, yeah, and it divides up by who you're serving. So, unfortunately, we really can't allow for any funds to be used for food or beverages for any meetings that you have internally or with your CCR or support groups with your clients, all of that. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule. They're delineated within the solicitation, but you need to be very, very clear. And I'll be honest with you, we don't like food and beverage. So you really have to follow those waivers and make sure that you're clear in the narrative if you're going to try it. But as a rule, OVW is really, very clear that, we start off by saying food and beverage are not allowed. So take it for what it's worth. Now, if you're traveling as part of your $10,000 set aside for OVW-sponsored training or travel, yes, if you go away, you would be allocated. You can allocate your hotel per diem at a government rate, and also the government rate has what we call per diem, and per diem is a daily rate that would provide for your meals for that day, as well as any other ancillary needs that you may have. And that's all, the government rate is found on gsa.gov, and it's dependent upon the location of which you're traveling to. But you would be allocated funds for travel for those OVW-sponsored training and travel events, if that answers your question.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
I see a question that I'd like to address, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If you are DSVC centered, you don't need an MOU, correct? Unless partnering with an outside agency for the project. I'm really glad this question was asked. You cannot apply singularly, okay? You have to have at least one partner. So therefore, you do need an MOU, even if you are a nonprofit domestic violence sexual assault agency.
Okay. Linda Hawkins, you've been stressing that GMS will be down. I thought we submit via grants.gov. How does GMS apply to our applications?
Linda, thank you so much. That's my error, and it is grants.gov. I apologize. It's grants.gov, and I think it's just a matter of habit. We said GMS. I apologize. It is grants.gov. GMS does not apply to your application process.
Okay. Judy Chen, disability, deaf, LEP access. Do we provide policies or just briefly discuss access?
What's, I would say, is required in the solicitation is discussing how anything you're proposing in your solicitation will be accessible. So, I think it's the second part of you don't need to provide policies. If you have policies, you may want to mention that, certainly, and what those policies are very briefly. I know it's asking a lot to get in 20 pages, everything that we're asking for, but you do need to address within your application how you're going to be providing access for individuals with disabilities, individuals who are deaf, and individuals with limited English proficiency. Thank you.
Okay, Ariel Herman, for the summary data sheet number 3, if we are giving stipends to partners, does that make us a pass-through agency even if we're implementing the activities as well?
I need to refer to summary data sheet number 3. Hold on just a minute, please. What the exact question is, here we go. Okay, so summary data sheet number 3 under summary data sheet requirement is a statement as to whether the organization applying will serve as a pass-through entity, a fiscal agent or sponsor for an organization or organizations that will ultimately implement the project. If so, the applicant must provide a statement acknowledging that should an award be made. And it goes on to say many of the requirements if that's the case. If you are providing stipends to organizations, and I'm hesitant because we're a little nervous about the word stipend, just from a budget standpoint. I think it's easier if you break down what you're providing for an individual on an hourly rate if possible, so that it's really clear what services they're providing and how many hours or days or an annual number of what the expectation is. If it's a stipend, it's X amount, and it's not real clear what services necessarily were provided for that stipend. So that's why I'm just a little hesitant on the word stipend. But if you are providing funds to another organization, even if it's a small amount of funds, you would answer yes to that question number 3 on the summary data sheet.
Okay, next question. That we haven't answered in the chat. On page 7, the out-of-scope activities comprehensive, usually the unallowable expenses are much more lengthy.
Okay, unallowable activities? I'm sorry, what page was that, 70?
No, 7.
7, I was going to say we don't go up to 70. Hold on just a minute. I thought it was on page 8, but let me just, okay, so we have out-of-scope activities on page 7.
That list comprehensive.
Yes, and then unallowable activities are on page 8, and I'll just briefly go over both. I'll start with unallowable. It's very clear. There are 5 things. You cannot lobby. You cannot do fundraising, and that includes a lot of times, every year we have a handful of people that are putting in a grant writer in their, it's for, their sustainability pieces, looking for additional fundings or something, and they're putting in a grant writer. No, because that's fundraising. You cannot incorporate that within your proposal. Purchase of real property, no. And we don't do any capital expenditures. Construction, no. Physical modifications to buildings, even including minor renovations. And this is unfortunate, but I'll tell you why. And minor renovations include painting or carpeting. We can't do that because we get into what's known as National Environmental Protection Agency requirements, NEPA, for any type of renovation. And so those requirements are very difficult to achieve within a very limited period of time, and that's why they are not allowable with these funds. These funds are really meant for direct services. Direct services is the key. In terms of out of scope, we've talked about research projects before. Research projects are not allowable, but with the exception of 3%. Out of scope is supervised visitation program, mainly because OVW has a program that addresses a family courts program, addresses supervised visitation. And then I spoke briefly to this before, but not as much as I probably should have. On out of scope, page 7, number 3, child abuse or family violence issues, such as violence perpetrated by a child against a parent or violence perpetrated by a sibling against another sibling, not allowable. It's out of scope. A lot of times you'll see law enforcement code domestic calls, and domestic may be everything from two brothers fighting or two friends fighting in the home or a parent and a child, and that's not what we're talking about when we talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, teen dating violence, and stalking. We really want to look at, for domestic violence, individuals who have a current or former intimate partnership with a victim. And then we go on to talk about education and prevention for students. And we really want to focus education and prevention toward sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. And therefore, we are not considering bullying programs, character building, or just basic general educational programs. We're really trying to focus on education and prevention for the violence against women issues. Thank you for that question.
Okay, we're going to skip down back to Paula. So Paula's on page 3, section 1, A and B.
Yes.
And she said they seem to contradict because BI says that is within metro area. So page 3, section 1, A and B.
Okay.
Says they seem to contradict each other.
Well, okay. We're taking that literally from the statute. I see your point, and if you want to talk about this further, give me a call and we'll break it down. But essentially, for purposes of defining the rules, you know, whether you're rural or not, the key to that success is following Appendix G. I see what you're saying about the distinction between A and B, but I think it's all about the second part of A, which is as designated by the Office of Management and Budget. I think that's the distinction between the two. If you want to talk further, we can, you can give us a call later and we'll go over that with you. Thank you. That's a good question. Very astute.
Okay, and then going back to David Dalton about abuse of an adult, including disabled. So he said, abuse of an adult includes disabled, prohibits illegal sexual contact. For example, a 36-year-old woman with a 65 IQ is sexually assaulted by her stepfather, was sexually assaulted and abuse of an adult. Would we just categorize that as SA service?
Yes, and that would be allowable, yes.
Okay. Okay, so Judy Chen, de minimis rate. This is new to us. Would you speak to it, please?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Judy. De minimis. And while I'm speaking, Charlotte or Michelle, can you look to see what page that's on so we can refer folks that don't know what we're talking about? This is new. Our DOJ financial guide, the Department of Justice financial guide, is really driven by some new regs, you know, the OMB circulars, we call them, that were effective the end of, I think it was December of 2014, if I'm not mistaken. You're testing my memory. But nevertheless, one of the things that changed in there was really fortunate, especially, I would argue, for nonprofit programs, because they now allow it for a de minimis to be included in your budget. That means if you do not have a federally approved indirect cost rate, and probably, and I'm doing this anecdotally, but probably a very small percentage of folks do, you can use the de minimis rate of 10% automatically, no questions asked. And, indirect costs are for all of those costs that we need to keep a service running, right? In your budget, you might be applying for an advocate, and you might be asking for a desk and a computer, and that's fine, all that's fine. But, that indirect of the gas and electric and so forth, and everything that your agency requires to have a placement for that agency, we're now allowing 10% de minimis rate for nonprofits, no questions asked. You do not need a federally approved indirect cost rate.
Okay. Ariel Herman, for Alaska needing $15,000 for training, it says we can go over budget, I assume by $5,000. Should we say something about that in our budget for why we're over the $750,000, or somehow otherwise document somewhere why we're over the usual amount? I mean, it's not that you're going to get more than $750,000, right? It's just that the portion of your budget going towards training will be more than the $15,000.
Actually, you shouldn't apply for anything over $750,000. That's the cap, period. What we were saying, and I think it was just misinterpreted, was you can apply. You're in Alaska. We would expect you to have a set aside of $15,000 for OVW sponsored training and technical assistance. If you wish to go over that $15,000 and make it, you don't think that's sufficient to cover training and technical assistance for all of your partners during the 3 years, and you want to apply for $25,000, that's fine. But you still need to be with under that cap of $750,000 for a total budget if you're a continuation project.
Okay. Twila Rosenberg, sorry Twila if I mispronounced that, would the legal assistance certification letter be needed if advocates, not attorneys, are providing civil legal assistance, as in they're assisting victims with completing civil protection orders? So if it's civil legal...
Thank you, Twila, for that question, and the answer is no. It's a great question, but the answer is no. It's only for attorneys who are barred within your state or within another state and practicing, have the ability to practice within your state.
Okay. Laura Cook, can the 30%, we're going on the 3B on page 2.
Okay.
Can the 30% for prevention be used for one of the things listed under 3B, or must it address all of them?
Another great question, Laura. Thank you. You can apply for prevention for any one of those issue areas, meaning domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or stalking. Or you can, do one, or you can do all. But many of our grantees, just focus on teen dating violence or what have you, and only do one. So that's absolutely fine. And I want to thank Judy, Chen, and Gabriella for finding the page number that I was looking for when I was talking about Diminitus. I can't say it now. Page 21. I'm sorry. I desperately need a drink of water, which I'm going to get here. Thank you. That was a good question. Any more, Michelle?
Yeah, we've got a couple. Maria Altonen, our DVSA program is under an academic institution, but we work in a hospital providing direct services to SADV victims. And we want to partner with rural hospitals to increase their ability to provide services. Would we be eligible to apply?
Thank you, Maria. You're certainly eligible to apply. However, one of our requirements is also to have a nonprofit, non-governmental service provider with a history and expertise of domestic violence and sexual assault. And we do have the definition of what a victim service provider is within the solicitation. You'll need to make sure that you meet that definition. You say you're under an academic institution. The question is, are you nonprofit, non-governmental? And that's a question that certainly you can call us later and talk through with us if you need help with that.
Okay, I've got two questions related to sexual assault clarification, Amy and Kara. One wants clarification on the sibling to sibling. What about a sibling sexually assaulting another sibling, as in interviews that would take place at a CAC?
Okay, when it's excellent questions. We have an excellent group of participants today, and I love these questions. And I'm so glad they're coming up because everybody can hear the answers on the pre-application call. And this is really valuable information for all of us because I'm realizing points that we didn't hit upon that we really need to. Sexual assault is allowable. You can serve sexual assault victims regardless of their age, everything throughout the lifespan. So to answer, what about children who have been sexually abused by a sibling or another child in the home? Absolutely allowable. And I think that that was also the second individual's question as well. So hopefully I responded to that appropriately.
Yeah, that was Kara's question too. Linda Hawkins, read letters of support, page 18. This is only for court applicants, correct?
It is, and we tried really hard to get that language so it was clear, but just so everyone understands, the letters of support option is only available for state courts, tribal courts, and that's because courts aren't able to sign an MOU. Generally, a court is precluded from signing an MOU. And so we provide them the option, if they are an applicant, to pursue the letters of support as opposed to the MOU. But it's only available for state or tribal courts. Thank you for that.
Okay, I think I have one more question. Maria will send you guys the phone number to reach us directly. The three of us have, we'll send you all three. David Dalton, you previously said a private partner was needed. Can you clarify private or?
I'm not sure we said private. What you need, the requirement is a nonprofit, non-governmental service provider that has the history and expertise of serving domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or stalking clients. And the definition is clearly defined within the solicitation in that required partnership section, so you should review that. But that's the requirement that I think we were referring to at that time. Charlotte, are there any questions that you want to address, or?
No.
Here's our contact information, by the way. I just put that up if you can see it. Our phone number is 202-307-6026. You can ask for the rural unit, or you can email us at ovw.rural@usdoj.gov. And Alicia, I believe our time is up now.
It is. Thank you all so much. The recording will be posted to the TA to TA website along with the closed captioning transcript. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.